The Galactic Empire stood unchallenged for over 10,000 years. Its reach extended across thousands of systems, its armies forged from genetically engineered warriors, its fleets vast and unyielding. Among the galactic races, submission was a pattern. Resistance lasted mere days, sometimes hours, before cultures were absorbed into the imperial order. Through intimidation, propaganda, and the precision of overwhelming force, the Empire sculpted a galaxy where defiance was a forgotten word. When humans were first discovered, there was mild curiosity. Their homeworld, Earth, was located on the edge of a barely charted spiral arm, insignificant in size and technological maturity. Initial intelligence classified them as emotionally volatile, tribalistic, yet unimaginatively peaceful in interstellar terms. Observers noted their conflicting nations, their obsession with media, their laughable space program still bound to chemical propulsion. But more importantly, the psychological profile claimed they feared war. They mourned their dead. They clung to fragile peace accords. They had to be coaxed, even dragged, into collective military efforts. The Empire's grand strategists, in their high spires of obsidian command towers, concluded Earth would fold without incident. The emissary ship arrived in Earth orbit with rehearsed demands, backed by a modest escort fleet. The message was clear: unconditional surrender, integration into the Imperial supply network, and compliance with technocratic oversight. Other worlds had accepted these terms with barely a whimper. The humans responded with delay. Debates unfolded in the United Nations chamber. Language of compromise was drafted. Warnings were issued, translated, and ignored. The Empire noted their hesitation and marked it as fear, exactly what they expected. Behind the diplomatic curtain, however, another nation within Earth moved differently. The United States of America didn't waste time with symbolic speeches. Internal channels buzzed with activity. Agencies activated contingency plans not even their allies were aware of. Military command pivoted to threat protocol before the Empire's ship had completed its third orbit. Decades of asymmetric warfare, counterinsurgency, and technological experimentation were being drawn together. The Empire watched Earth's politicians debate while completely overlooking the silent mobilization of the American war machine. On a secure orbital channel, an Empire tactician noted the anomaly, an unusual data signature near Earth's northern continent. It pulsed briefly, then vanished. A glitch, they assumed. Yet their atmospheric probes began failing intermittently. Surface scans returned corrupted. When they sent a team to investigate a rural area in the western region of the landmass called the United States, the first real surprise occurred. That unit did not report back. At first, the Empire suspected mechanical failure. Human terrain was primitive, erratic weather, inconsistent infrastructure. A second team was dispatched, escorted by aerial drones. They reached the location of the first team and found only scorched ground, debris, and a severed uplink beacon. Moments later, their drones were torn from the sky by unknown forces. The surviving scout recorded a brief transmission before static overtook the feed. Human silhouettes moving with coordinated speed, wielding projectile weapons with brutal efficiency. The Empire was not unnerved yet. Isolated resistance, they called it. Insurgents. Perhaps local warlords seeking leverage. But that theory dissolved when 3 more teams vanished within a solar rotation. Now, Tactical Command watched Earth with narrowed eyes. Across the continent, energy readings flared. Satellite arrays were hijacked, feeding misinformation into the Empire's fleet. Human aircraft, once dismissed as outdated relics, began flying erratic patterns, jamming probes, and vanishing below radar horizons. The Empire's forces, bred and trained for conventional superiority, weren't prepared for this kind of resistance. They expected capitulation, not a ghost war. Within their command council, doubt began to creep in. A term surfaced, one not seen in the Empire's archives in centuries: adaptive hostility. It described a species that, when cornered, stopped obeying patterns. A species that refused rational surrender. They had encountered it once before on a now-extinct world. The data was redacted, locked beneath layers of encryption. But the whispers reached the Admiralty, and the name of this anomaly echoed through the upper echelons of Imperial military intelligence. America, not humanity, not Earth's governments, just that one entity. It was the root of the failures. The Empire couldn't yet grasp the magnitude of what was coming, but the data was undeniable. This fragmented, boisterous, loud, and culturally chaotic nation was systematically dismantling their assumptions. It operated not with a hive mind, not with central command, but with decentralized units trained to improvise, to resist, and to retaliate. The Empire had fought disciplined soldiers. They had crushed rebellious colonies. But they had never faced a culture that made war a heritage, that glorified defiance, that trained not just armies but generations. The algorithms ran scenario after scenario, and all of them showed one grim trend. The more pressure applied, the more aggressive this group became. They didn't fracture, they hardened, and their warning was simple, buried in a hacked Empire broadcast tower and transmitted in every dialect known. The Empire's patience had limits. After days of diplomatic silence from Earth, they initiated Operation Subjugation Protocol 17, a standard planetary pacification process. Orbital shuttles descended over several global regions, deploying drones, crowd suppression units, and scout patrols. The objective was simple: demonstrate power, enforce order, and display the futility of resistance. It had worked flawlessly across dozens of worlds. They expected confusion. Instead, they encountered silence. In the sector designated Alpha North, covering the central and western territories of the United States, their insertion began under calm skies. Their lead detachment approached a settlement deemed low risk, sparsely populated, without visible military presence. The reports marked it as civilian-grade infrastructure. That was the first mistake. The second mistake was underestimating who lived there. Within minutes of landing, the patrol scanners were jammed. Communications blacked out. When they attempted a fallback maneuver, their transport was destroyed, its power core ruptured with surgical precision. What was assumed to be a random act of resistance was, in truth, a calculated ambush. The enemy used terrain, timing, and tools the Empire didn't recognize. The last feed captured a projectile weapon tearing through composite armor, followed by a voice. Firm, American, and unapologetic. The Empire sent reinforcements. Heavier infantry, mech-assisted troopers, and perimeter drones. They spread across nearby terrain, expecting to flank the resistance. They walked into an invisible minefield. Homemade explosives crafted from industrial equipment, concealed in places only someone familiar with rural infrastructure would know. Several Empire units were wiped out in synchronized detonations. The Americans didn't just fight. They anticipated, reacted, and adapted. Their knowledge of their own land made every tree, every ditch, and every grain silo a tactical asset. Data began trickling into the orbiting command ship. Losses were mounting not in hundreds, but in efficiency. Small squads were vanishing without a trace. Recovery missions returned fewer troops than they sent. Nighttime brought no relief. Instead, it brought fear. Thermal scans showed ghost-like heat signatures moving rapidly through dense cover. They hit targets, collected weapons, and disappeared. They didn't fight for territory. They fought to bleed the enemy, and it was working. By the third day, a pattern had emerged. The resistance wasn't using traditional military formations. This wasn't conventional warfare. It was coordinated by distributed cells, civilians, veterans, special forces, militia, and hunters. Each acted independently, yet with a shared purpose. The Empire's reliance on central command protocols became a vulnerability. Americans operated in chaos, but their chaos had a rhythm. Empire analysts attempted to map their behavior using standard insurgency models. All of them failed. These fighters weren't acting out of desperation. They weren't civilians defending homes out of fear. They were executing tactics designed long before the Empire arrived. Military documents surfaced with names like Unconventional Warfare Doctrine and Irregular Operations Playbook. Their history was not of avoiding war, but mastering its many faces. The resistance wasn't ad hoc. It was doctrine. Captured drone footage showed combatants operating with brutal clarity. One soldier, wounded, used his own blood to mark a sniper coordinate before detonating his position to prevent capture. Another intercepted Empire comms using a repurposed ham radio and fed them false movements, leading entire platoons into crossfires. These were not random heroes. This was a system built on the idea that every citizen could be a combatant if needed. The phrase, "Don't tread on me," appeared in a dozen intercepted transmissions. No translation was needed. The Empire tried escalation. Urban areas were cordoned. Civilians were rounded up for containment. But every time a city was locked down, new fronts opened in the countryside. When drones blanketed the skies, the resistance went underground. When heat sensors scanned buildings, decoys led them astray. American fighters didn't resist like other species. They refused to be predictable. Then came the psychological attacks. Empire troopers began receiving distorted messages. Old Earth military quotes spliced into local radio signals. "Come and take it. We fight not because we hate what's in front of us, but because we love what's behind us." Entire squads reported sleepless nights, haunted by an unseen enemy who mocked them in their own frequencies. A captured Empire officer, clearly shaken, described the Americans as not human in the way others are. They don't break when cornered. They dig in. The Empire, for the first time in its expansion history, initiated a partial withdrawal from a planetary sector, not because of overwhelming force, but because they could no longer predict the opposition. It wasn't just military units that fought them. It was mechanics, truck drivers, farmers, hunters, and veterans. Every door could hide a marksman. Every building was a trap. Every retreat by the enemy was a lure. One hack transmission was traced to an underground data node. It contained nothing but a single sentence, displayed in the Empire's own formal language. "We don't fear war. We perfect it." Analysts tried to dismiss it as bravado, but frontline reports kept coming, each more chaotic than the last. The losses were no longer just tactical. They were psychological. Americans were not responding like any other conquered species. The concept of surrender didn't apply to them. They fought not for survival alone, but for identity. For them, resistance was not just a duty. It was tradition. The Empire realized too late that Earth wasn't merely resisting. It was teaching them fear. The Empire escalated. What began as a targeted occupation became a full-force campaign across the North American continent. Drop cruisers deployed armored divisions. High-altitude bombers traced paths across the skies. They called it Containment Sweep Theta, designed to crush what they now acknowledged as a specialized insurgency. Their assumption was that more force would yield faster results. It did not. It exposed the limits of their doctrine. American forces didn't engage in direct confrontations unless they dictated the terms. Instead, they dissolved into the terrain, fragmenting into strike teams that seemed to exist everywhere and nowhere. Empire patrols moved in convoys. The Americans moved in silence. When the Empire tried to seize fuel supplies, they found the roads mined and convoys ambushed. Their logistics collapsed under hit-and-run attacks on supply routes. Pilots began refusing to land in contested zones. It wasn't just the danger. It was the unpredictability. What unnerved the Empire most wasn't the resistance itself. It was the efficiency. Americans didn't fight for months and burn out. They rotated, delegated, and returned stronger. Units operated autonomously, improvising with whatever they had. Captured plasma weapons, homemade EMP rigs, even industrial farming equipment turned into traps. Where others would have broken, these fighters adapted faster than the Empire's algorithms could simulate. Empire intelligence struggled to catalog what they were facing. This wasn't a single military command. It was a culture of warfare, fed by generations of experience, strategy, and conflict. From street-level skirmishes to electronic sabotage, Americans fought like students of war raised on doctrine and hardened by history. They didn't just use tactics, they taught them, evolving with each encounter. Drones were jammed using hacked microwave towers. Urban surveillance was blinded by simple mirror networks and signal spoofing. The Empire's most advanced recon assets became useless within days. Psychological strains set in. Reports of demoralization increased among the Empire soldiers. They began describing the Americans not in terms of units, but in myths. Ghosts in the forest. The fire that never dies. These weren't exaggerations. The Empire's troops were trained to expect submission, not a battlefield where every civilian was a combatant and every hill a kill zone. They were conditioned for intimidation. Against Americans, intimidation failed outright. Their command center analyzed a recovered combat feed, showing an American soldier pinned beneath debris. Instead of calling for help, he used his final breath to activate an explosive trap, taking the enemy squad with him. Another feed showed a unit fighting on despite being outnumbered 10-1, refusing surrender, shouting coordinates to artillery even as they were overrun. The Empire's war doctrine classified this behavior as irrational. They failed to understand it wasn't desperation. It was doctrine engraved deep into the American identity. Captured footage from body cams and satellites told the same story repeatedly. Americans advanced when they should have retreated. They attacked logistics instead of fortifications. They used old-world battle tactics and fused them with cutting-edge warfare. No pattern held for long. 1 week, they deployed drone swarms. The next, they used horse-mounted scouts through impassable regions. Each approach unpredictable. Each strike devastating. The Empire believed Earth's nuclear deterrent was a bluff. It wasn't. But Americans didn't rely on superweapons. They relied on persistence. If they couldn't overpower, they outlasted. If they couldn't match technology, they exploited its blind spots. They found the cracks, widened them, and turned the Empire's own systems against them. A single American cyber unit took down an orbital relay chain, throwing the entire fleet's command network into disarray for 14 minutes. Long enough for dozens of ambushes to unfold flawlessly. As weeks turned to months, the term Relentless became synonymous with American resistance. The Empire could not sleep, could not patrol, could not predict without risking blood. It wasn't just special forces. It was everyone, from retired veterans in remote towns to tech-savvy teenagers disrupting enemy drones. Participation became expectation. They weren't conscripts. They were volunteers motivated not by orders, but belief. A recovered Empire log described a coordinated strike where American forces predicted enemy positions based solely on traffic disruptions and shifted birds. They didn't need satellites. They used instinct, pattern recognition, and intuition. This was not primitive warfare. This was refined chaos, executed with surgical intent. Even when they lost ground, the Americans made sure to extract a price. They booby-trapped ruins. They staged fake retreats. They spread false comms chatter, luring Empire units in a friendly fire. The goal was never to hold land. It was to erode will. Slowly it worked. What broke the Empire's momentum wasn't a decisive battle. It was exhaustion, a war of attrition they weren't prepared for. Every time they thought the resistance would fade, it intensified. Every lull was a reset. Every defeat became a lesson for the next fight. America didn't just survive the invasion. It reshaped itself around it. The Empire's troops looked across the battlefield and saw a nation not trying to reclaim normalcy, but one that embraced war as its element. The most chilling realization came during a decrypted broadcast. A low voice spoke in calm English, layered with cold precision. "We are not here to survive. We are here to make sure you don't." The signal repeated once, then vanished. No origin, no signature, just a reminder. Relentless didn't mean angry. It meant unbreakable. The Empire came to conquer. What they found was a people who viewed war not as the end of peace, but the price of liberty. And Americans never leave a debt unpaid. The Empire shifted tactics again. They abandoned the concept of fast domination and embraced a prolonged occupation. Fortresses were established. Zones were cordoned off with high-tech barriers. Surveillance grids were deployed to monitor every breath, every heat signature, every unauthorized signal. They turned parts of America into isolated control zones, believing attrition would eventually starve the resistance. They failed to grasp that Americans had never relied on top-down systems to maintain momentum. They adapted by going deeper underground, figuratively and literally. What emerged next shocked the Empire's command. Entire towns vanished from the grid. Residents evacuated in pre-planned patterns, leaving behind traps, decoys, and false trails. The Empire thought they had displaced the enemy. Instead, they had walked into pre-prepared kill zones. American resistance had not collapsed. It had evolved into a ghost state, networked, distributed, and untouchable. The Empire's machines began turning against them. Hacked drones returned false data. Recon mechs malfunctioned after entering contaminated zones filled with microwaves and EMP pulses. Their own AI systems grew unreliable, infected by code injected through improvised quantum signals sent from repurposed university equipment. One such breach exposed an entire command archive, resulting in several high-level assassination missions executed flawlessly within occupied territory. The mythos around the American fighters only grew. The term ghosts was now standard in Imperial comms. They no longer operated in units easily defined by rank or branch. Instead, they adopted call signs and roles with names like Reapers, Vultures, Whisper Teams, and Firehands. These weren't formal designations. They were identifiers earned through deeds and passed on through informal channels. The Empire's psychological units tried to downplay their significance, but frontline soldiers spoke of them with fear and respect. Every failed offensive drained morale further. Every cleared area would be recontested within days by forces that didn't exist on paper. American resistance was agile in a way the Empire could not replicate. The Empire's bureaucracy, its structured command hierarchy, and reliance on precision turned into weaknesses. The Americans embraced uncertainty. They thrived in decentralized chaos. If one leader fell, another rose. If equipment failed, they improvised. If territory was lost, they struck where it hurt more. Despite harsh environmental tactics, flooding zones with electromagnetic pulses, toxic gas, and drone swarms, the Americans remained operational. When electronics were denied, they returned to analog. When GPS was jammed, they used physical maps, stars, and old hunter trails. They didn't need superiority. They just needed to persist. They didn't wait for support. They were the support. Imperial analysts began reviewing ancient Earth history for insight. What they found was not comforting. Americans had been shaped by centuries of conflict, civil war, rebellion, and foreign engagement. Their doctrine didn't begin with alien invasion. It was built across generations, refined through brutal self-analysis, and then tested globally. From jungle warfare to cyber conflict, their military culture was embedded into civilian life. The average resistance member wasn't trained by the state. They were raised by veterans, taught by media saturated with war strategy, and surrounded by a society where preparedness was culture, not command. The Empire's next strategic mistake was attempting to divide the Americans. They spread propaganda, broadcasting messages across occupied cities suggesting surrender would lead to restored normalcy. They tried to exploit cultural divides, political, racial, economic. But what they didn't understand was that external invasion collapsed all internal fault lines. Differences were irrelevant when sovereignty was challenged. American society may have been fractured in peace, but in war, it unified with terrifying speed. The turning point came not through a massive victory, but through silence. In one sector, a full Empire battalion disappeared overnight. No explosions, no broadcasts, just silence. Later scans revealed the battalion had walked into a false evacuation route lined with underground passageways and traps. No survivors, no remains, just empty armor and silent drones. The area was marked by a flag, one the Empire had seen before in scattered history files. A rattlesnake coiled over the words, "Don't tread on me." From that moment, operations slowed. Empire High Command no longer viewed the campaign as one of pacification. It had become damage control. The Americans weren't trying to win in traditional terms. They were eroding the Empire's will to fight, its capacity to operate, and its belief in supremacy. They didn't engage in large battles because they didn't need to. Every engagement was selected to drain, confuse, and demoralize. Even within the Empire's ranks, murmurs of failure grew. Officers questioned orders. Field units reported hallucinations from sleep deprivation, constantly under threat from unseen enemies. Reports emerged of captured soldiers being treated, not with cruelty, but cold efficiency. Interrogated, documented, and released with trackers leading them straight into traps. It was psychological warfare layered atop physical attrition. The Americans didn't want negotiation. They didn't want coexistence. They wanted the invaders gone, not just in body, but in memory. For the first time, the Empire's fleet in orbit requested reinforcements with a caveat. They needed experience not in conquest, but in counterinsurgency against an enemy that had no central node, no single point of failure. By then, it was too late. The resistance had moved beyond defense. It had become the foundation of something new, a decentralized war engine embedded in the population. Every home was a bunker, every child a messenger, every elder a strategist. What the Empire failed to conquer in days would take decades to undo, if it could be undone at all. The final intercepted message from a fleeing officer's body cam summed up what the Empire had come to understand. They don't just fight like they've done this before. They fight like this is what they're made for. The Empire's fleet lingered in orbit, not as a sign of dominance, but hesitation. High Command initiated withdrawal protocols from several continental zones, citing strategic recalibration, though internally, the word failure appeared in red across confidential documents. On the surface, the resistance hadn't reclaimed every city, nor pushed the invaders into full retreat. But something irreversible had shifted. Control had become an illusion. Occupation, a liability. The Americans had reshaped the very definition of war, and the Empire was not evolving fast enough to survive it. What broke the will of the invaders wasn't loss of resources, but certainty. They could no longer predict what would happen next. Every policy, every algorithmic model failed. Their numerical superiority and technological advantage, once their strongest assets, had become burdens. Over-reliance on automation turned into exposure points. Their soldiers no longer trusted their equipment. Every wall could be breached, every scan deceived, every plan sabotaged before it began. The Americans didn't just survive under pressure. They performed best when cornered. In the aftermath of failed campaigns, the Empire initiated diplomatic outreach, not for peace, but for containment. They proposed treaties, economic concessions, and partial autonomy. No reply came, not because the resistance lacked diplomats, but because they weren't interested. There was no appetite for negotiation, only removal. The Americans had tasted invasion, and they were not content with surviving it. They wanted to ensure it never happened again, not to them, not to anyone. The war morphed into something uglier for the Empire. Its commanders began vanishing, abducted from secured bunkers, found days later tied to their own war machines, silenced by methods that defied forensic logic. Empire communications were increasingly jammed by crude but effective Earth tech, delivering phrases that repeated like rituals. We remember. We rebuild. We respond. These weren't slogans. They were warnings. Back in Imperial space, discontent spread. The illusion of the Empire's invincibility had fractured. Other worlds watched Earth's defiance with awe and calculation. Rebellions began to spark in sectors that had long been pacified. Subjugated peoples who had cowered in the shadow of orbital dreadnoughts now studied American resistance strategies. Earth hadn't just repelled the Empire. It had exported a blueprint for defiance. The Americans didn't claim moral superiority. They didn't posture. They simply refused to yield. That clarity, that single-minded focus, rattled the highest levels of the empire's structure. No ideology, no religion, no tribal loyalty had ever achieved such coordination. The Americans' strength wasn't unity of background, but unity of purpose. They had nothing in common but the belief that freedom was worth killing for, worth dying for, worth fighting forever for. Empire analysts came to a chilling consensus. American culture was not geared toward peacetime pacification. Its systems, its myths, its stories, everything reinforced resistance, rebellion, and self-reliance. Even their art romanticized underdogs. Their games trained tactical thinking. Their entertainment simulated war scenarios. This wasn't a population disrupted by invasion. It was a war-ready civilization waiting for justification. When the final drop ship lifted off from the last contested zone, the Empire left no farewell message. There were no ceremonial declarations, no illusions of victory. The Americans watched them go without celebration. They didn't need it. The war wasn't over because the enemy had left. The war was over because they decided it was. In the ruins of what was once a battlefield, communities began reconstruction, not under new governance, but with a sharpened worldview. Independence wasn't just a tradition. It was now generational memory, taught with clarity, not nostalgia. Children grew up not fearing aliens from stars, but training to be the ones who'd repel them. Books were written not to glorify, but to document method, mindset, and discipline. America had been tested, and it had chosen its response with brutal, unwavering finality. Years later, a former Empire commander gave testimony before a classified tribunal. When asked why Earth could not be conquered, his answer was recorded without embellishment. They don't fear death. They don't worship strength. They don't obey power. They question everything. And worst of all, they prepare. Every time we thought we'd crush them, we realized we'd only revealed another layer. Earth remained a sovereign world, untouched by further conquest. Attempts to infiltrate it resumed in shadows, spies, drones, false treaties, but none succeeded. What had been forged through blood and fire was not just military capability. It was reputation. Humanity, through America, had become a symbol not of aggression, but defiance incarnate. When whispered among galactic rulers, Earth was no longer referred to as primitive or unstable. It had earned a new classification, Relentless. No statues were built. No declarations were needed. The message had been delivered in silence and fire. We will not kneel. We will not break. If you come again, you will leave less than you arrived. The galaxy had long believed humans were too emotional to fight clean wars, too chaotic to organize, too soft to endure sustained occupation. They were wrong on every count, because the Americans didn't just resist. They taught the galaxy what it meant to be truly free. And once taught, that lesson could not be unlearned.